through the different types of debt.
So I think that's also one of the challenges, is that the numbers that we're seeing right now are showing a flattening or even a declining rate of secured debt. So where, property acquisition, for example, or even vehicle acquisition, which is more short term, but is still at least you've actually have acquired an asset that if you look after that asset, it will retain some of its value over the lifetime of the loan. The reality is that that's not the primary debt instruments that are used in South Africa, and the majority of the debt that we're seeing and the levels that we're talking about now actually relate to unsecured debt, which, there's no asset to back it up and is generally used just for consumption expenditure.
Now, you touched on it a little bit, but talk us through the best kind of debt that you can have.
Well, I think there's a couple of factors that relate to that. I mean, it's not necessarily the best type of debt. It's really critically looking at your circumstances and asking yourself, why would you be needing to borrow this money? Obviously there's situations that we all get into in our lives where there's an emergency or a crisis, and for a short period of time you need to borrow the money. I think it's more about having an action plan of how you're going to get out of that debt, and not just short term to repay that loan and take another one, but how are you actually going to get out of the cycle of having debt. There are healthy and responsible financial ways of using debt products. I mean, like credit cards, for example, that give you periods of interest-free sort of loan money, but if you repay that debt at the end of that cycle, it hasn't actually cost you anything. Now, so it's not necessarily that the credit card's a bad thing to have, it's just about how you manage that. So I think that's more the case, is really just being very much more focused around, why do I need this loan? What are the different options that are available to me? Not necessarily just taking whatever you've been approved for when that's not what you need. So you've got a crisis, you need 3,000 Rand, the credit provider comes back and says, well, we've automatically qualified you for 8, so you take the 8. That 5 just disappears into a pool of your lifestyle, and at some point it obviously has to be repaid, and that hasn't been taken into account necessarily from a budget point of view, and and that's how the cycle starts. It's really kind of wanting more than what you can afford to have.
Could the problem lie in these complicated documents that outline the different stipulations of the credit and debt and loans? Could it be that people aren't actually understanding what they're getting into and what they're signing?
Well, I think there could be an aspect of that, although South Africa has gone quite far down the road of trying to put those kind of documents into simple English. So really trying to, again, focus on the consumer and make sure that the consumer is able to interpret and understand what is involved in the product that they're getting involved in, or that they're actually taking. But I think there are components of it that are easily sort of misconstrued, and particularly in things like calculating interest rates. Whether you're talking about a monthly interest rate, an annual interest rate, an effective rate, an average rate. For the average consumer, those things are not, even for somebody who's done maths to matric, they're not necessarily going to go back and work out that rate. If you need the money and you need it now, you're not necessarily taking consideration of all of those things. And I think in that case, there are opportunities to maybe bend the rules a little bit, and pull the wool over consumers' eyes. But certainly, as I say, what you've seen from a regulatory point of view, there's a lot being done to try and minimize that. So it is also up to the consumer to educate themselves and make sure that they're making the more savvy choices when they go into the debt markets.